lasts for 3 to 5 days from the beginning of the menstrual cycle. Interestingly, the absence of menstruation indicates pregnancy or ovarian disorders such as polycystic ovarian disorder, or even factors such as stress and ill health. The menstrual phase is followed by the follicular phase, which occurs between days 6 and 14 of the menstrual cycle. During this phase, the primary follicle in the ovary matures into a Graafian follicle. Simultaneously, the endometrium undergoes proliferation, a process of regeneration which results in the formation of a new, thick endometrium. The follicular phase is followed by the ovulatory phase, which occurs during the middle of each menstrual cycle. During this phase, the Graafian follicle ruptures to release an ovum or egg cell into the pelvic cavity in a process called ovulation. The ovulatory phase is succeeded by the luteal or secretory phase, the last phase of the menstrual cycle, which occurs between days 16 and 28 of the menstrual cycle. This phase sees the transformation of the remaining Graafian follicle into a yellow mass called the corpus luteum. The endometrium too thickens, and its blood vessels become coiled and enlarged. Interestingly, the endometrium and corpus luteum play a vital role during the early stages of conception. For instance, a fertilized egg gets embedded in the endometrium and derives nourishment from it. The corpus luteum, on the other hand, starts secreting progesterone that helps maintain the endometrium and encourages the growth of the developing embryo. Conversely, in the absence of fertilization, the corpus luteum degenerates and triggers the breakdown of the endometrium. This marks the start of menstruation and the beginning of a new menstrual cycle. Did you know that the phases of the menstrual cycle are controlled by the interplay of different hormones secreted by the ovary and the pituitary gland? At the onset of menses, the anterior pituitary gland increases the secretion of the two gonadotropic hormones, luteinizing hormone or LH and follicle-stimulating hormone or FSH that simulate the development of primary follicles. However, the amount of estrogen and progesterone released by the ovary during this time is less, which causes the thinning of the endometrium. The release of LH and FSH keeps increasing, and during the follicular stage, these two hormones stimulate the maturation of the primary follicle into the Graafian follicle. Moreover, LH and FSH stimulate the maturing follicles to release estrogen, a hormone that helps in the proliferation of the endometrium. The increased levels of estrogen, in turn, cause the anterior pituitary gland to release a surge of LH and FSH, so much so that by the ovulation stage, the levels of FSH and LH in the blood are at their peak. This LH surge causes ovulation by rupturing the Graafian follicle and turning the follicle's remnants into the corpus luteum. The estrogen level in the body too reaches its peak, and we see a gradual thickening of the endometrium. However, once the corpus luteum begins secreting large amounts of progesterone, an FSH and LH inhibiting hormone, the levels of both these hormones drop, which in turn also lowers the levels of estrogen in the body. However, the endometrium continues to thicken because of an increase in the level of progesterone. Incidentally, the corpus luteum will keep secreting progesterone if a fertilized egg gets embedded in the endometrium. However, in the absence of a fertilized egg, the corpus luteum stops releasing progesterone and degenerates. A drop in the level of progesterone, in turn, triggers menstruation as well as the restart of the release of LH and FSH by the pituitary gland. Menstrual cycles normally stop once a woman reaches her 50s. This phase is called menopause. The menstrual cycle is an important process in a woman's body, and it consists of 4 phases which are controlled by hormones released by the ovary and the pituitary gland. Fertilization or fusion of gametes is the most vital event in the process of sexual reproduction, as it results in new life. In humans, while the male gamete or sperm is motile, the female gamete or ovum is non-motile. Therefore, for fertilization to occur, the 2 gametes must be brought together. This is achieved through insemination, where the penis releases semen filled with thousands of sperms into the vagina. Interestingly, while half of the total sperms released carry the X chromosome, the other half contain the Y chromosome. These sperms then rapidly move through the cervix, pass through the uterus, and finally reach the ampullary isthmic junction of the fallopian tube. In the meantime, the ovum, after completing the first meiotic division, gets released into the fallopian tube with the rupture of the Graafian follicle. Upon its release, the ovum begins to undergo the second meiotic division. However, the division does not go beyond the first phase. Interestingly, the ovum contains only the X chromosome. Studies have shown that the ovum is filled with cytoplasm called the yolk or vitellus, surrounded by a membrane called the vitelline membrane. The vitelline membrane is ensconced in another membrane called zona pellucida. However, there is some space between the zona pellucida and the vitelline membrane, which is called the perivitelline space. Surrounding the zona pellucida is a layer of granulosa cells called the cells of corona radiata. The ovum present in the fallopian tube now starts drifting towards the uterus. Once it reaches the ampullary isthmic junction, the ovum gets bombarded by several thousand sperms. However, only one sperm penetrates the zona pellucida and initiates the fertilization process. Moreover, this penetrating sperm induces the zona pellucida to stiffen, which prevents other sperms from entering the ovum. After gaining entry through the zona pellucida, the acrosome present over the sperm's nucleus starts secreting enzymes that aid the sperm head to get through the ovum's cytoplasm while the sperm sheds its tail. The fertilized egg now resumes the remaining phases of the second meiotic division. However, this division, being unequal, results in the formation of 2 unequal bodies, a haploid ovum called ootid and a second polar body. While the second polar body degenerates, the ootid and the haploid nucleus of the sperm fuse together to form a diploid zygote. Did you know that the sex of the zygote is decided at the time of fertilization? If the ovum is fertilized by a sperm containing the X chromosome, the resulting zygote contains XX chromosome and would develop into a female. However, if a sperm containing the Y chromosome fertilizes the ovum, the resultant XY zygote develops into a male. Thus, it is the sperm that decides the sex of the fetus. A little more than a day after its formation, the zygote starts moving down the fallopian tube. Simultaneously, the zygote also undergoes mitotic division, and with each successive division, the number of daughter cells doubles. This division is termed as cleavage, while the resultant daughter cells are called blastomeres. About 3 days after fertilization, the zygote contains nearly 8 to 16 cells and is called a morula. Over a period of 2 days, the morula descends down into the uterus and transforms itself into a blastocyst, a hollow ball composed of about 100 blastomeres, which are arranged in 2 layers. The outer layer, called the trophoblast, eventually gives rise to the placenta, while the inner layer, consisting of a group of cells called the inner cell mass, eventually differentiates to form the embryo. Interestingly, at the blastocyst stage, the zygote, now called the embryo, gets attached to the uterus as the trophoblast grows outwards and penetrates the endometrial lining of the uterus. In response, the endometrial cells divide and start surrounding the blastocyst. This causes the blastocyst to sink and get implanted into the uterus. Once implantation has occurred, pregnancy gets initiated. Moreover, after implantation, inner cell mass cells get differentiated and begin to form the embryo. Embryo formation is thus a complex process that begins with fertilization and ends with implantation of the embryo. The joys of holding a newborn baby know no bounds. The birth of a baby is an intricate and complex process that begins when the zygote undergoes cleavage and develops into a blastocyst, a hollow ball consisting of a trophoblast, an inner cell mass, and a cavity called blastocele. As the trophoblast grows outwards and penetrates the endometrial lining of the uterus, the blastocyst, with a developing embryo, gets implanted in the uterus and pregnancy is initiated. After implantation, the trophoblast grows further, which causes the blastocyst to sink in and get covered by the cells of the uterus. As the blastocyst sinks further into the uterus, finger-like projections called chorionic villi start appearing on the trophoblast. As the chorionic villi grow further, they interlock with uterine tissues to form the placenta, a structural and functional unit between the developing embryo and maternal body. Interestingly, when the placenta begins to form, the inner cell mass moves downwards and differentiates to form an embryonic disc consisting of 3 germ layers: the outer ectoderm, middle mesoderm, and inner endoderm. The term germ layer indicates that each of the layers gives rise to tissues. The ectoderm, for instance, gives rise to the nervous system and the skin, whereas the mesoderm develops into muscles and organs such as the heart and kidneys, while the endoderm gives rise to the entire digestive system. Did you know that apart from the 3 germ layers, the embryonic disc also contains certain cells called stem cells, which have the ability to give rise to all the tissues and organs present in the human body. As the embryonic disc grows,